Okay, ready? Okay. You each have a handout, and I encourage you to take notes there, so you may keep these handouts. There's pencils on the table there if you need something to write with. Are we going, Emmanuel? Okay. Let's go over. This is a recap and a review from last Sunday. With the help of the ancient Syriac text Liber Gradium, or Book of Steps, a book of the ladder, we are able to see that the church, which is the body of Christ, is the mystery of creation. Creation is the visible narthex of the church that hides and reveals the hidden nave of the heart, which hides and reveals the kingdom of heaven that is within you. This theological structure of creation, which is its mystical or real structure, I'm referring to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1, where it talks about the shadow of the law, which was not itself, it says, the icon of the good things to come. That's the word it uses to contrast what's really real from the image of the real. The icon is the really real in Hebrews 10:1. That's the word that's used. The theological structure of creation, which is its mystical or real structure, reveals the creation in movement, moving from the visible, or the narthex, to the invisible nave, the heart, and into the sanctuary of the kingdom of heaven. This movement is an exodus. Exodus is made up from two words, a path, which is odos in Greek, hodos, that goes out from, or goes from out of, ex. So exodus, a path that goes out from. It goes out from nothingness into being, out of darkness into light, from earth to heaven, so that nothingness is filled with being, darkness is filled with light, earth is filled with heaven, man is filled with God, death is filled with eternal or uncreated or divine life. So then, let's tell Alfie what it's all about. What is the nature and the destiny of man? What is the essence of this life, its meaning? What is this creation moving from? What is it moving to? What is it moving in? And I have that word what in italics because I want to draw your attention to it. Are you satisfied with that word? Megan, why not? What should the word be? Who, exactly. Who is the creation moving from? Who is the creation moving to? Who is the creation moving in? All of this, and obviously it's Christ in the kingdom of heaven. So that the foundation of creation is not physics, it's that which is beyond, it's not even metaphysics. It's what's beyond metaphysics. It's the kingdom of heaven, which is invisible. And obviously, if the kingdom of heaven is the foundation of all things, then our perspective is going to be radically changed compared to if we thought that the foundation of everything was, let's say, physics. So what is the fulcrum or the gate or the door or the hinge, the center point of this invisible spiritual new exodus of the gospel? And how do we get to that gate, that center? How do we make this invisible exodus, this journey? What is the path? How do we walk this path? All right. What would you say is the fulcrum, where everything hinges? Where would you say it is?
Heart.
Yes, good, the heart. So you have the movement going into the heart, and from the heart into the kingdom of heaven. What do I say here? What is the? Okay, well, I didn't ask it here, but we should ask it here. What is the? And I don't know what word to use. This movement to the heart. What is its substance? What is its essence? What is its realness? I mean, what is it? What is this movement? Well, prayer, you're close. You're on the way. You're on the way. It's erotic love. Through prayer, we are laying hold of the will. We're laying hold of our desire in order to bring it back to its natural origin, which is Christ, who out of his love, overflowing love, has created the world. And he has filled the world with himself. So the world moves in erotic love. That's the movement of the world. I mean, the world does not move in time. Time moves in the erotic love of God and of the Theotokos, or of Christ. So that time is an image of this movement of God coming down to us and of the world ascending to God. Or in the Theotokos, the man, and Christ as man ascending to God in this erotic love. And this imagery is given even in the church. You know, we have the liturgical calendar, we call it, which begins with the feast of the Theotokos Nativity, the beginning of the year. It goes to the end of the year. The last feast is the Dormition of the Theotokos. Then you have this little gap, kind of a Passover, between the death of the Theotokos and her birth. But this little gap between the death of the Theotokos and her birth takes place within a 40-day period that begins with the transfiguration of Christ on Mount Tabor, August 6th, and ends with the elevation of the cross on September 15th. So we have a mini Pascha here. And in this mini Pascha, we are passing from the death of the Theotokos to her birth, her falling asleep in the Lord, to her being born as a child of God, the daughter of the King. And within this liturgical cycle of the church, all of the events of Christ, the whole life of Christ takes place. We celebrate all of the events of Christ. And so it's like the liturgical calendar of the year, you know, the way that we're moving through the year, from the birth of the Theotokos to the death of the Theotokos, it's like that is an image of time. The Theotokos is an image of time. However you want to say it, she's the real. She's the icon of which time is the shadow, and she holds the Christ in her life. Time, the creation, holds Christ within itself. This is what can be you can say is being shown in the liturgical cycle of the church year. But even in the mystery of the Theotokos Dormition, even in that icon, you have a wonderful image, you have the Theotokos lying on the bier, lying on her deathbed, dead. And then in the background, you have the Christ in the arans, you know, the blue arans we call it, and he's holding the soul of the Theotokos as a little child. So there in that icon, we have this beautiful image of the Theotokos, who holds Christ, is being held by Christ. It's a beautiful image, and it's showing the mystery of how creation is structured. It's structured in the love of God for his mother and of the mother for her son. Each one holding the other, embracing the other. And I like to say that this is the essence of the Christian faith, you know. This is the essence of the Christian faith. It's that tenderness, that tender, intimate love of the son for his mother, of the mother for her son. And who in the world does not understand that? Even if you've not had a good mother, I would hope that you can at least imagine what it might be like to have a good mother. Just think to yourself, if you take the Theotokos out of the picture and you don't honor her, she's not a factor in your Christianity. I don't even think it's Christianity. But look what you're doing to the Christian faith. You're gutting it. You're turning it into a dry set of moral precepts or religious assertions that you're supposed to believe so that you can be saved. Big deal that you believe it. How does it change you? No. You have the Theotokos, the presence of the Theotokos in the church is revealing to us that the movement of time, the movement of creation, is centered on this love of God for his mother. I mean, come on. The love of God for his, who doesn't understand the love of the son for the mother? And the mother for her son. What mother here doesn't understand that? You know, so suddenly when that is the image of the Christian faith, when now the Christian faith becomes this mystery of tenderness, of love, of, you know, familial, homey, you know, something that we all resonate with. All right. So now, what I'd like to do, excuse me. So, if this is what you understand the creation to be, well, what's the meaning of your life now? I mean, you know, what does my life mean? What's my life? What am I all about? You know? Would it not be to find this love and to become this love? I mean, who, you know, when a person is in love, suddenly life has meaning. You're filled with the joie de vivre, you know. You don't need to ask the question, what does life mean? You're singing too much. You don't have time to ask, what does life mean? All right, so you see how this vision, you know, this imagery of the church is presenting to us, you know, the invisible reality, what's really real, that can't be seen, it can't be measured. It gets back to what we were talking about months ago, between the who and the what. You see how this is basically giving us another image of the mystery of creation, the mystery of the church, not as what it is, but as who it is. All right, so if the meaning of my life is to get into my heart, that is crying for love, how do I get there? All right, that's what I want to talk about. Let's take this imagery of the visible and the invisible, the three layers, the three courts of the church, and let's play with it. The church is the mystery of the creation, we're saying. So let's say, instead of church, let's just say creation. So let's say that the visible is the creation. And the invisible, we'll say, is the heart. And then the even more invisible is the kingdom of heaven. All right. But you know, look at the world. The world is anything but Eden, right? The world is pretty, oh my God, the world is so dark. We are so dark. We are so full of anger, sadness, brokenness. It's a wonder that the world even continues to revolve. We are so broken. So let's put this in biblical terms. I mean, we're in biblical terms here, but let's put it in other biblical terms. And let's use as our cue the movement that is inherent in these three layers, from the outward to the inward, from creation to the kingdom of heaven, through the heart. This we say we're calling this the Exodus. From out of the creation into heaven. Not so that the creation is left behind, but so that the creation is filled with heaven. So using that as our cue, let's go to the biblical imagery of the Exodus, and let's take the Exodus as kind of a microcosm, a microcosmic image of the world, of all reality. And let's say for the creation, let's say Egypt. And for the heart, let's say Golgotha, the cross, the tomb. And then we'll keep the kingdom of heaven, but we'll also say hell. What's the characteristic of Egypt in the story of the Exodus? Slavery. Bondage. Governed by, what's that? Idolatry. Does anybody know anything about the religion of the Egyptians, even a little bit? They worshiped everything. It's sickening. They worshiped everything. Kind of like the Chinese eat everything. Egyptians ate everything, worshipped everything. Slavery, idolatry, okay, Pharaoh. And so that's the existential condition, let's say. We'll use Tim's favorite word. The existential situation. We're in slavery, we're in bondage, under the governance of the Pharaoh, who's not interested in us at all. He just wants to build more palaces and kings on our back. Can we give this, I think we can and we should, let's give this its emotional, moody equivalence. How would you feel in slavery? How would you feel in idolatry? Well, you know, idolatry is a tricky thing because, in fact, we love idolatry. We love our idols. We don't think we do, but we love our idols. Whatever you're addicted to is your idol. If you're addicted to the flesh, that's your idol. And think how much you enjoy the pleasures of the flesh. You don't hate those idols at all. But what are the consequences of that idolatry? Well, the prophets give it. Blindness, deafness. Let's put that one with slavery. But how do you feel in confinement, in slavery? Paralyzed. Very good. Hopeless. Can you read all this? You don't have to, you know what we're saying. Hopeless. Yeah, I mean, you get the idea. Miserable, disoriented, confused. So anyway, the sicknesses of idolatry are blindness, deafness, muteness, withered hands, crippled feet, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, in this life, you could say that we are enslaved. Actually, I should say we need one more thing. We are enslaved to the principles of idolatry. That means that we have eyes, but we can't see. What does that mean? We have eyes, we can see the visible world, but we can't see the invisible world. We have ears, we can hear, but we can't hear. As it says, they have ears, but they don't hear. We can hear, we have ears, but we can't hear the invisible, the still small voice of God. So forth and so on. They have hands, but hands that can't move. They have feet that can't walk. I don't know, I think maybe we could say the hands and the feet. I wonder if we could say that represents the will. Because, we love our idols and we're always going to the temples of the idols. We're handling the temple, the idols. We're walking to the temples of the idols. Why? Because we want to. That's where we want to be. But unless we're sufficiently distracted, what happens? I mean, how do we begin to feel? Bored? And loneliness begins to set in. And when those things begin to set in, loneliness, sadness, fear, boredom, what do? We hasten to the temples again and to our idols. to fill our mind, to fill our lives with more distractions, so that we're not feeling the misery of our boredom so much. Now, David, I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot. What I'm describing, is it real or is it not? No, I mean, does it really exist? Okay, there's only two answers, so if no wasn't right, it must be yes. No, I know what you're saying. Okay, I know. But we really do experience these things. Okay. It's important to see that, because what I want you to see is that this Egypt, in this 3-layer picture of the creation, is a real place. It's a real place. It's not imaginary. But it's a real place, not in a physical sense. It's a real place in an invisible sense. All right? It's a spiritual place. All right. Golgotha, or the tomb, the cross, the place of the cross, the place of the tomb, this will be the place of the heart. And who's on Golgotha? Who's reigning on Golgotha? R-E-I-G-N. Who's reigning on Golgotha? The Lord Jesus Christ is reigning. I think he's even, you understand, this is the light of the world that is being raised up on the cross. So when it says that the sun was darkened, I think there's two things that are being said. Number one, it's being said that, and you'll hear it in the sermon this morning. Number one, what's being said is that this is the last day. We have come to the last day. And the prophet Amos says the last day is a day of darkness, not light. But secondly, I think it's saying that the cross is the supreme theophany. Because from the cross, Christ is Christ, the light of the world, who shines in the darkness and the darkness cannot comprehend. This is the supreme manifestation of his love. Okay? It's the supreme manifestation of this is the supreme goal of the movement of creation. Christ he empties himself. Well, what is that? That's erotic love. In his erotic love for us, he empties himself. And he takes on the form of a servant. He becomes one with us. All the way down to the point of death on the cross. And now he's absolutely one with us. And Blessed Augustine, I think he's expressing the mind of the church when he sees the cross as the marriage bed on which Christ has consummated his union with us. So that what reigns, R-E-I-G-N-S, on Golgotha is the love of God. Christ himself is the Lord on Golgotha. Now, this follows, what I want to say about this, Golgotha, follows from what we just said about Egypt. This is what I want you to understand. This is the thing I want you to understand. We just established that Egypt is a real place. It's invisible, it's a spiritual, but it's a real place. What I want us to understand is that Golgotha is a real place. It's not imaginary. It's not a religious idea. It's a real place. And just like Egypt can be present to us now, I mean, we are present we're in Egypt. So also Golgotha is present to us now as a real place, but it's an invisible place. So obviously it's the place in the heart. And so obviously the kingdom of heaven is a real place. None of these is imaginary. This is what I want you to see. These are images taken from geographical places on the globe. But as geographical images, they're theological, and they're real places. So we have this exodus from the creation to the kingdom of heaven, and that movement is over here. There's this exodus from Egypt, from the existential state we now live in, to varying degrees. We are making an exodus, a new exodus, an inner exodus, a hidden exodus, a spiritual exodus from out of Egypt to Golgotha, to our heart, and from there to the kingdom of heaven. And if this is a real place, then we have to be careful that we don't mistake some mood or feeling or emotion or sentiment from up here for here. I would suggest that Golgotha is parallel to the depths of the Jordan, and that the waters of the Jordan that are above the depths represent feelings, moods, all of those things, sentiments, emotions, thoughts. You get the idea. We're trying to get to the bottom of the Jordan, we're trying to get beneath. We're trying to get into our heart. Remember, the heart is deep beyond all things. We're trying to get to Golgotha. We're trying to get to the bottom of the Jordan. We're trying to get beneath all of our thoughts, feelings, moods, desires, trying to get beneath all of that. And if Golgotha is a real place, David, I'm going to ask you, this is again a yes or no question.
Yes.
If Golgotha, okay. If Golgotha is a real place, will you know when you're there? Yes, you've already given the answer. Yes, you will. You will. You will know. Because it's real, it's a real place. It's not imaginary. So, brothers and sisters, this is what we're all about during Great Lent. So now, let's look at this. The question before us then is, how do we get from here, where we are, in our existential state of misery, confusion, the roller coaster of emotions, mood. Some days I feel up, some days I feel down. It's a cloudy day today. I'm feeling a bit discouraged, feeling depressed. How do I get from there into Golgotha, into the presence, into the real presence of Christ in my heart, the tomb of my heart? I contend that you cannot get there by yourself. You need the church. And that's one reason why we don't take up these ascetic disciplines on our own and by our own wisdom. You do that, you're just going to go round and round in Egypt. That's all. You need the church to help you get down into Golgotha, to get into the real place of your heart. And these passages that I have on your handout, these are all meant to speak to this. How do we make this invisible exodus or journey in one way or another? Let's go back here to 1 Peter 1:13. Let's talk about this for a couple minutes. And then I think the next one that I want to do will be, let's say chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. All right, therefore, now I'm bringing out the Greek here. Therefore, gather up the place in you where the thoughts and the images that are constantly running through your mind are generated. Remember, in your English translation, it says, "Gird up the loins of your mind." That's what it says in most English translations. But what are the loins? We don't say it in public. It's the place where babies begin. It's the seed. It's the place where the seed is generated, where the male seed is generated. Gather up the place in you where the thoughts and the images that are constantly running through your mind are generated. It's a beautiful image. It's a power. It's a tremendous image. We've got all of these thoughts going, and the word in the Greek is literally running through the mind, going through the mind. So it's whatever's going through the mind. It's not the mind as a static thing. The noun in the Greek is a dynamic noun. It's in movement. These things that are moving through the mind. Well, if they're moving through the mind, they're coming from someplace. And they're trying to get someplace. Where are they coming from? St. Peter tells us they're coming from your desire. Your desire, in physical terms, it's coming from your sexual desire. But theologically, what is sexual desire? Is it not desire to live? That's what it is in its spiritual theological terms. So gird up in you your desire to live. More than that, I would say. Sexual desire is a physical image that incarnates, embodies our desire to be loved and to love in its pure form. So gird up the place where your thoughts originate. Gird up your desires where you desire to be loved and to love, be able to love. So we don't just desire to be loved. I think we also have just as strong a desire to love. We're not satisfied until we can love. Gird up that place where your love and your life and the desire for love and life originate. And so I mean, you could stop right there. St. Mary of Egypt, let's take her as an example. It took her, 17 years, let's say? She was in the wilderness for 40 years when St. Zosimus found her. But I think she says it took her 17 years to conquer those demons of desire. So she was working on this first phrase of St. Peter, you could say, for 17 years. 17 years. Girding up, laying hold, the root of your desire. And I ask you to think about it. It's a very powerful image. You're laying hold, you're laying hold of it. Because for how many of us right now, it has a hold of us, right? And it's taking us all kinds of places. Okay, there's certain things that we won't do, but even though we won't do them, we find ourselves fantasizing, perhaps, about them. So these thoughts, these desires are working on us, and they have a hold of us in one way or the other. So here's the first program, the first part of this Exodus. Lay hold of your desires. Yes, Tim?
So, laying hold of your desires, usually a desire that you have that maybe becomes an addiction.
Okay.
It's not something that just manifests itself. It's usually something that is the result of some kind of trauma or some kind of ingrained aspect of your past that makes you broken.
Okay, right.
So, coming to understand or entering into the depths of your heart, are we talking about something that just pulls apart or peels the layers of the onion back so you can see, oh, this is why I have this? Or are you talking about something more like Oedipus, who comes to realize, my God, this is what I've done, and all along I thought I wasn't going to do this.
I think it's all of that. I think you're just describing the process. At this point, it might be a psychological process of psychoanalysis, analyzing myself. But let's go to what you just said. Okay, you've analyzed the source of your desire, of your perverted desires, let's say, and you've discovered that it's rooted in some kind of deep-seated brokenness. Okay. Can you heal that brokenness? Yes or no? No, you cannot. You cannot. You cannot. So we need to go to the next part of the verse. There's hope. There is hope, David.
I know there's hope.
But it's not in you. You cannot heal it. But I'm glad you brought that up, because it underscores, I don't know how the importance, or it underscores the pathos of what we're doing in the church during Great Lent. So he says, gather up the place in you where those thoughts and images that are constantly running through your mind are generated. So in your sexual desire or in your love. I think what you said is really good, Tim. It's actually not the sexual desire that is the source of all these perversions. It's the brokenness that's beneath that the brokenness that comes from not feeling loved or not being able to love, fear, sadness, or whatever. So it actually goes beyond sexuality. And secure that place with a belt, he says. You secure that place with a belt. I've shown this to you before. All right, hang on. Got to find my pocket. No, I'll just stay here. Yeah, I've shown you. This is what it is. Men used to wear robes like I'm doing. So when they wanted to go on a journey, they would take their robe and they'd get a belt and they'd go it around. Now they can walk. So, but it's beautiful how it's saying it's like the robe that you're wearing are the desires or the brokenness. This is what you're wearing, this dirty garment, this broken garment. So gather it up with a belt. Now here's the question. How are you going to gather it up? Where did it go, David? How are you going to gather it up? This is what I want you to see. You gather it up by means of the cross. By means of the cross. Or the ascetical disciplines of the church. Because these are the concrete form of the cross. And those ascetical disciplines are prayer and fasting and following the commandments of Christ. Fasting would be, you know right away that this isn't going to be easy. Because to fast means that you abstain. You don't give in to those desires. You're shaking off Pharaoh. You can't do it on your own. So you take up the cross of prayer and fasting. Through the fasting, you're emptying yourself. Through the fast, you're doing what St. Paul says. You're putting to death or you're crucifying what's earthly in you. Everything that separates you from God, which is your idolatry. You're putting to death what's earthly in you. He says, put to death your earthly members. But then he goes on to list the earthly members, and they're not your arms, your ears, your legs. They're things like fornication, anger, greed, lust. These are the things that you put to death. How do you put them to death? I think you put them to death. You put them to death by the cross. But if all you're doing is fasting and putting yourself to death, I don't know that you're going to have much success. You need to pray. To pray means that you're bringing yourself into the presence of Christ. You're filling your soul with Christ. And we know from the church that Christ is the source of all beauty. He's the source of all goodness. He is life itself. Not biological life that comes from the dust and returns to the dust. But he is the life of God that is eternal. It's uncreated. It's radiant with light. Its very stuff is this love of the mother for her son and the son for his mother. This is a love that is infinitely beyond any pleasure of the flesh. And so if we're not filling our soul with the vision of God that is given to us in the church, through the prayers of the church, through the hymns of the church, through the teachings of the church, through the scriptures of the church, this is what we should be filling our minds with. And for crying out loud, if we're filling our minds with the images that come to us from the TV, from the videos, from the internet, for God's sake, what are you filling your mind with? You're filling your mind with idols. And that's what you got to root out. How can you possibly hope to be shaped and to come to a vision of this love of God that is presented to us in the imagery of the church, in which all of time is moving in this love of God? How can you possibly hope to see it and even to feel it if you're constantly putting yourself in Egypt and you're living there, you're staying there. No. We've got to go on an exodus. We've got to take up, gird up our loins, gird up our desires, and bend our desires, turn our desires away from Egypt and head for the Red Sea, head for the wilderness by means of prayer and fasting. And now we become students of the commandments of the Savior. And as I've said, when we do the fast, this is the beauty of the fast. The fast is a very concrete thing. And when we do the fast, we're not just talking about the cross anymore, we're doing it. When we're praying and fasting, we're not just talking about the cross, we're doing it. And now the power of that cross begins to become active in us. And honestly, I think every one of you has an experience. You do the best that you can, okay? Maybe your success is not as great as you'd like it to be. But I think all of us do the best that we can during Lent to do some form of fasting and some form of praying. And even though it might be very little, by the time you come to Pascha and Holy Week, you're different. You're different. You feel different. And you come to Holy Week and you come to the services of Holy Week and there's a qualitative difference in the way that you feel inside. You know that you're there. So take that as an image, as a lesson, as a teaching of the church. That what if we could do this year round? I mean, maybe not to the intensity that we do it during Great Lent because we're weak. But what if the year round, 24/7, we were giving ourselves to the work of filling our mind with God and not with the idols? If we were 24/7, 365, abstaining, fasting from everything that takes us away from God, what if we were doing that? I think the experience of Great Lent and Holy Week and Pascha tells you that you're going to be changed. You are going to be changed. You're going to be changed by the power of the cross that is working in you through the fasting and the praying and coming to church, receiving the body and blood of Christ. And it is Christ who's going to be changing you. You can't change yourself. All that you can do is take up your cross. And as you take up your cross, Christ begins to work in you. And it's He who begins to put to death all of these things. Because now you begin to experience, in a real way, a mystical, spiritual, real way, you begin to experience the beauty of God, the joy of God, the love of God. And your soul wants more and more of it. And that is what changes us. And that's what Great Lent is all about. This experience of Christ working in us by just doing His commandments, taking up His cross and praying and fasting. Oh, okay, I guess we're done. We got to get upstairs.